Well, at the moment, we really are waiting to see when that address by President of the African National Congress, President Cyril Ramaphosa, will take place. We're expecting it to kick off at 2 o'clock, but we also are keeping a close eye on a press briefing meant to take place this morning. So lots that we are still waiting on, but also a lot of discussions happening on the ground. And I think it's a great opportunity as well for us all to really reflect on what the way forward is going to be for the party. And over the past 4 days, a lot of criticism towards the party on whether or not they have focused primarily on just setting up their leadership structures and not given enough attention to policy. And I think we're going to actually really look at the policy direction that the African National Congress is taking coming out of this conference. And for that, we are joined by foreign editor for the SABC, Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, good morning to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Good morning, Naledi.
Well, so two big discussions that have taken place for the SABC, and I think you can unpack those for us. The first one being the ANC's direction where international relations is concerned. Number one, why is that important for the ANC?
It is quite important because as South Africa, we have positioned ourselves as a gateway to Africa. But secondly, when the African National Congress was formed in 1912 in Bloemfontein, in Mangaung, the leaders who converged there, the intention was to unite the entire continent. It was not only about South Africa and the freedom of black people in South Africa in terms of the land question as well, because they were dispossessed. But it was also about uniting the African continent. That is why during the launch of the ANC in 1912, you had different leaders, monarchies from different countries on the continent who converged there because they were part of the ANC structure when the ANC started. Now they do have what they term perhaps the structure that deals or accommodate traditional leaders, but they were part of a structure like your Veterans League, and therefore the intention was to unite the entire continent. And since post-1994, ANC government has tried to ensure that they play a prominent role in the region, the SADC region, in terms of development, peace and security, the continent, and also globally, with more focus on the South-South cooperation and the previous relationships they had when they were in exile. And therefore, international relations, quite important, particularly when you look at what transpired for the past 3 years. The issue of COVID-19 did unite the world. And South Africa played a very prominent role at that critical time when the world was experiencing the pandemic. President Ramaphosa within the AU, because when there was an outbreak, he was the chair of the AU. He had to marshal the leaders on the continent to find a way to deal with that, but they had to work with other regions as well. When he fought for the TRIPS waiver, so that there can be a way to manufacture vaccine by developing countries with the support of countries such as India. That was another wake-up call that we are not an island. As South Africa, we are part of the global village, and therefore the international relations document is quite central. You heard what the Minister of International Relations said when he was leaving for the United States of America to attend the Africa Summit, that they really want to strengthen the position of South Africa at the global level.
Yeah. Talk to me about what this international relations report, or the document rather, of the ANC says about then the direction moving forward. And you mentioned the US-Africa Summit, I think an all-important one, because it brings Africa into the discussion also with the G20, right? Also a critical international body there. What is the ANC's position then on how the country then needs to engage with big bodies, particularly like the G20, for instance?
Well, we know that to really look at what President Ramaphosa has done, South Africa is the only African country within the G20 group. At the meeting in Bali recently in November, what he did, he pushed for African Union to be a permanent member of the G20, like your EU.
Yes.
And that did gain traction because during the meeting of African heads of state and government in Washington, President Joe Biden pointed out that he does support the move. And there's hope that more leaders within the G20 will do the same. And therefore, next year, when India is hosting the G20, we expect the announcement there. But for me also, what is very important next year, South Africa will be hosting the BRICS summit. You know, China, Russia, Brazil, and of course South Africa. And we now have many countries who want to join the BRICS nations. And therefore, it looks like this partnership, it's becoming a formidable force in terms of balance of forces, not only political, because the intention of BRICS was always at economic level and also at developmental level. It looks like they are even discussing a way of ensuring that how you use the different currencies with the BRICS nation in terms of trade and investment and move away from the dollar. And therefore you can see that BRICS is becoming a formidable force, and South Africa will be hosting that summit next year. And then in 2025, a very important one, if the ANC is able to win elections in 2024, President Ramaphosa, if he's still in government, all is well, he will have to again host the G20 summit. That will be a big one. Yeah, so you can see that there's a lot coming in. And I'm told that during the discussions on the international relations committee or the commission, you'd recall we were waiting outside, waiting for Mbeki when he was about to arrive, and that scuffle. In that commission, apparently he advised the ANC to ensure that they don't really get down, obsessed with Americans and the West and the, but rather focus on strengthening the South-South BRICS and on the continent with the African Continental Free Trade Area in place. And then when the document that came from him in the peace and security, also emphasizing a need to ensure that we have an Africa that is at peace, in line with the ANC policy and during the formation of this oldest liberation organization.
I find that approach by President Thabo Mbeki very decisive, right? Where we had South Africa really seen as the country that's able in very many global issues really being able to bring different parties together. And you talk about the peace and security document of the African National Congress as well. I imagine that the role that South Africa would have played perhaps in the Tigray-Ethiopian negotiations has come up in those discussions as well.
Yes, you had the president of the ANC during the opening of the summit when he touched on international relations. This is something that he was very proud of, really commending the former Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, who then became the Director of UN Women, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, in terms of the role she played with other mediators such as former President Obasanjo, former President Uhuru Kenyatta. You could see, and when he was emphasizing our former Deputy President, you could hear the pride.
Yes.
And him being very proud that we are continuing as a country to ensure that we have the world that is at peace. So I think that will continue to try and support Ethiopia, because the relationship between ANC in particular with Ethiopia dates back to exile years. Madiba got military training in Algeria and Ethiopia.
I think there's some big issues though, and I don't think we need to go into Palestine, because I think that the ANC's position on Palestine has been very clear that they're very supportive of the Palestinian side of the war there and the tensions there. But a big one I think is going to be what the party does with our relationship with Zimbabwe. I know that there have been calls for sanctions to be lifted on Zim, and then the critical role that we play in the bigger geopolitical space where Ukraine is involved.
Yes, yesterday you had the new Secretary General Fikile Mbalula really singling out Zimbabwe in terms of ensuring that you deal with that problem, because if you continue to have the challenges you have in Zimbabwe, Zimbabweans will continue president to come to South Africa, him going as far as saying they will not subscribe to issue of regime change, but they have to assist Zimbabwe, and reiterating what the president has been saying recently. You'd recall when he was in the United Kingdom for that state visit, he made a call for sanctions to be lifted against Zimbabwe. But in Zimbabwe, you'll find different views in terms of that. I mean, yesterday, Hopewell Chinono, a prominent journalist and also a writer, sent me a message to say, Sophie, please send me that clip when Balula is talking about Zimbabwe.
Sure.
So I'm sure it was trending, and therefore it's critical. But on the war in Ukraine, I think something must happen. It has been going on for a long time. And when Dr. Naledi Pandor was going to the US, his last briefing with the media, she spoke about a glimmer of hope, because currently all stakeholders are talking about negotiations and diplomacy. And therefore there's hope that something will happen. And she also pointed out that when President Ramaphosa came back from the G20 meeting, he spoke to President Vladimir Putin.
Right.
We don't know the content thereof. I'm hoping that, as promised, they will have that briefing of the officials. For me, of interest is international relations issues and the war in Ukraine. And perhaps for him to share with us what was the discussions all about with President Vladimir Putin. But this war has really crippled the world, and immediately after COVID-19. And I understand the frustration of the Secretary General of the United Nations to say now it's leading to poverty and food security challenges.
Yeah. Well, we trust that you'll bring us the outcomes of that discussion with Vladimir Putin. Of course, South Africa playing a critical role in so many geopolitical scuffles taking place on the globe. And of course, our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, always giving us the latest. Let's head back to studio. More from Nasrec throughout the day, though.